I have interviewed more than 40,000 job seekers in my 20-year human resources career. So it's safe to say I know a lot about interview questions. So which interview questions do I think deserve a raise? And which ones am I ready to fire? Let's rank them in a tier list. Hey everybody, thanks for checking out Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. I'm Chris Fitzpatrick, and today I'm taking my first stab at a tier list maker using tiermaker.com, and I am ranking some of the most popular, most common, or in some cases, most controversial interview questions that we've seen over the years. So let's get over to our tier maker and let's find out a little bit about the best questions and the worst questions. This is going to be a video for the interviewers. I'll tell you a little bit about what I think about some of your favorite interview questions or some of the ones I hate. And for the interviewees, if you hear some of these questions, I'm going to try and help you how to answer them. So let's hop over and get started. Here you will see our tier maker list, and the categories that I'll be placing these interview questions into are as follows. Show me the money.
Show me the money!
That's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Let's see if it pays off for him.
We'll let you know. We have your resume on file. Don't you love when you hear that? And last but not least, for those interview questions we want to fire, collect your personal belongings, Gordon.
Quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth.
So we have quite a few questions to get through, and right off the bat is an interview question a lot of recruiters and hiring managers use. It's designed to get the interviewee talking a little bit, and that is, tell me about yourself. It's a setup. It's, again, just designed to get things moving. And right off the bat, I'll tell you, tell me about yourself goes in, we have your resume on file. I do not like this question. And it's not quite bottom of the barrel. It's not quite getting fired, but it's one that we really don't want to have at the ready. And here's why. The problem with tell me about yourself is it's very vague. And it invites the interviewee to start divulging personal information about themselves, especially if that interviewee is not well versed in how to handle this question. And they could start talking about information that is protected, information that as an interviewer you really don't want them self-disclosing in an interview because you don't want it to create any issues down the line with discrimination or any other claims of information that you used against them that was protected. So the idea here in an interview is to try and keep things as professional and job related as possible. So I generally don't love tell me about yourself. I think good alternatives are things like tell me about your professional history, tell me about your work background, tell me about your skills and how you develop them, things along those lines. But generally I want to find something that's a little bit more focused and a little bit more specific. Now, for those of you who are interviewees, if you do hear this question, the way you handle it is to talk about job-related and professional experiences. So if you've done your research on the company and on the job, when somebody says, tell me about yourself, you're going to be talking about your professional self. You're not going to be talking about your family life. You're not going to be talking about where you came from. You're not going to be divulging personal information, but you will talk a little bit about your professional background. Next up on our list is sell me this pen.
Sell me this pen.
Now, this question has existed for a long time. I believe it was popularized probably in the 70s or the 80s. And I think Wolf of Wall Street has repopularized this question. Sell me this pen. This is specific to roles that require sales skills and persuasiveness. Sales jobs, sales managers sometimes use this question. And this will be our first entry into collect your personal belongings, Gordon. I hate this question. I don't like any question that asks a candidate off the cuff to sell them something specific, because real sales skill comes with product knowledge, comes with some degree of experience and a lot of preparation. And saying sell me this pen in an interview, you're not really testing their sales ability, you're testing their improv ability. And I will say this, I spent 7 months selling office supplies. If I were going for a sales job and a sales manager told me to sell them this pen, I would be able to do it because I used to sell pens. But the next person coming along who maybe sold electronics or sold something completely unrelated from office supplies might struggle a little bit and may not be as confident. So it doesn't really give you a good idea about the sales ability as much as the improv ability. Now, improv is a great skill, but I think there's a better way to ask this question. And that is to ask the candidate something that they're very knowledgeable about or something they're very passionate about, and then ask them to persuade you of the value of it and to go through a sales pitch with them for something that's kind of on their home court and something that they feel comfortable about and passionate about. And if they do a good job, to follow up by saying, well, we hope to provide you with a level of product knowledge and passion about what we'll be selling here that you just demonstrated to me in that example. And for a candidate, if somebody asks you to sell them this pen and you're not well versed in how to sell pens, I think it's appropriate to sort of follow up and say, well, the first thing that I would do is I would research and I would make sure I had all the product knowledge possible on the pen. Then what I would want to do is find out more about what motivates my potential customer, what their needs are, and then see how I can align the product knowledge to the need and talk about your sales skills in that way. So I don't like this question at all, and it gets fired right out of there. Tell me about a time that you failed. Tell me about a time you failed is what we call a behavioral interview question because it's asking for a story or an example. So if you're a job seeker or an interviewee, anytime you hear a question that starts with, tell me about a time or give me an example, they really do want you to tell them about a time. They're looking for a story. They're looking for something specific. So speaking in general terms, not the best approach with a question like this. Tell me about a time that you failed. I do like it. I'm going to put it up in That's a Bold Strategy, Cotton, because, again, I like behavioral interview questions. It does call upon the individual to discuss specific examples. And the reason I like Tell Me About a Time You Failed is failure is something that pretty much everybody's experienced. And a good interviewer, a good hiring manager, a good organization will embrace the fact that the individual's probably going to deal with failure at some point with the organization, whether it's their failure, their team's failure, an organization failure, whatever it is. And if you're doing it right, as the interviewer, as the hiring manager, you're trying to assess how the individual deals with failure. The problem is not that they failed. That shouldn't be a problem, at least. If you're screening people out because they actually honestly tell you about a failure they've experienced, then you're doing it wrong. But if you're trying to assess how they deal with failure and what their mindset is, then this is a good question. And for the interviewees out there, I would encourage you to be aware of a story just in case you hear this question. And you do talk about what caused the failure, and you can be honest about it, but then you immediately go into what you learned about it and how those adjustments helped you the next time. So even if the failure involved a lack of preparation on your part, being honest and forthright and saying that was when I learned about the importance of preparation, and that failure really did give me a chance to check myself a little bit and served as a reminder that I can't go into these situations without preparation. So since that experience, I've been really meticulous about getting into the habit of preparation and going and getting the information I need to know so that way I don't have that experience again, because while I embrace failure as a learning opportunity, what I don't embrace is failing multiple times for the same reason. It's a great way to answer that particular question. Let's go to this next one. Have you ever been fired? Now, I've never been asked this question, and I have not heard of any of my colleagues asking that question. I hear rumors about hiring managers asking this. And interestingly enough, there is a scene in season 2 of Mad Men, which if you followed this channel for some time, you know how much I love that show. I'm a Mad Men fanatic, where Don Draper asks that question of Kurt and Smitty, the new creatives that they're looking to bring in for Martinson Coffee. Have you ever been fired? We'll let you know. I don't love it. There's a lot of different reasons why somebody might be let go from a job. It doesn't necessarily have to be performance related. I also think it is far too easy of a question to kind of get around where a candidate doesn't really directly answer it. I think if you're looking at a resume, getting into specifics about, why did this particular role come to an end, Or, have you ever experienced losing a job that you weren't resigning from, and let them talk about maybe they were in a layoff situation. Maybe there was downsizing, and kind of let them go from there. But the reason I really don't like this question is because I think too often, if somebody does have an experience or an example of a time they've been fired, that is the recruiters or the hiring manager's way of screening them out and saying, I don't want somebody who's been fired before. I only want people who have left on their own volition. That's not really fair to the candidates, because what you're doing is you're screening out people who had circumstances that maybe were beyond their control, people who made mistakes, and again, learn from them. This is why I think tell me about a time you failed is a much better question than have you ever been fired. I don't see how much value you're really going to get from that question. Next question is, what motivates you? What motivates you? It's a bold strategy, Cotton. I don't mind this question. I kind of like it. Tell me about what motivates you. I think this question is good as long as there's a good follow-up question. As long as you then take the answer and you go into a little bit more detail and you do a little bit of probing, right? Because first of all, it's a question that's not behavioral. So it is something that somebody can answer a little bit more generally. What motivates you? Well, success motivates me, or my teammates motivate me, and they can be very general, and they won't necessarily get into a lot of detail. So then following up with, well, tell me about a time then that motivation served you well at an organization or on a project. How has that motivation shown up in your prior work history, and how do you believe that motivation would serve you here? Those are good follow-up questions. For job candidates, if you get this question, again, be honest about it. Think about what motivates you, and consider what's important to you. And be honest about that, but then sell your answer based on your research for the organization. I'll give you an example. If what motivates you is upward mobility and the opportunity for growth, which is a very popular answer to this question. I want to grow. I want to continue to succeed and exceed expectations and grow within the organization. And from my research, I understand that this is the type of organization that rewards hard work, success, and learning with the opportunities for advancement. And I want to be very forthright about the fact that that's something that does motivate me, and that's part of what motivated me to be here today, is that I'm somebody who can come in, provide top-notch work, ask questions, learn from mistakes, but continue to grow because I want to keep moving my career forward. It's a great way of answering the question while also selling your candidacy for the job to that organization based on that research. Good way to tie everything together, and then it makes those follow-up questions, I think, easier to answer. What's your leadership style? So if you're interviewing for a position that requires you to take a leadership role, whether you're actually managing other people, leading projects, or maybe it's a training program where the intent of the program is to get you to move into leadership down the line, you may hear this question. And again, it's a little general. It's not a behavioral question, but it is a good conversation starter to let the candidate know we're going to start talking about leadership. Or after you've gone through examples of leadership with a candidate, it's a good way to sort of punctuate the conversation. So as long as there's other questions surrounding the leadership and the management competencies, and this isn't the only question you're using, so whether those are follow-up questions or other behavioral questions, then I think this one is fine, and I'll put it up in bold strategy, Cotton. For candidates, for interviewees, if you get this question, again, you need self-awareness, and that's part of emotional intelligence, is you have to be self-aware. And in this case, self-awareness is, what is your leadership style? How do you lead other people? And then be able to tie in examples of times that you've taken a leadership role within a task, a team, or a project. Even if you haven't managed people before where you've had formal power, right? How have you used influence? How have you been in a position where you've been able to lead others because of your knowledge, or because you are a good communicator, or you're very charismatic and people are drawn to wanting to listen to you? Being able to provide those examples is very valuable when you talk about your leadership style. You also want to make sure that the leadership style fits the organization. So if the organization is in a really good spot and you come in and you talk about being this transformational leader who wants to break everything down and then rebuild everything from scratch, they may not like that. But if you talk about being a leader, for example, a servant leader, well, my job as a leader or as a manager, whether it's official or unofficial, is to make sure that my team has everything that they need to succeed, and my job is to serve them and allow them to be the best version of themselves. I think that's a great approach, as long as that's really your leadership style. Next up, what is the best feedback or criticism you've ever received? What is the best feedback or criticism you've ever received? And we have our first entry into Show Me the Money. So I love this question because it is behavioral. It does ask the candidate to call upon a specific example from their history of a time that they've received constructive criticism or feedback, whether it was on a project, as part of a performance review. And it's not dissimilar from tell me about a time you failed. I like it better because it's even more specific. And it does challenge the interviewee, but it gives them the opportunity to talk about it in terms of what they learned about it, what they learned about themselves, and how they adjusted. If I'm an interviewee and I hear this question, I'm salivating. I love this question as an interviewer and as an interviewee because I can be honest. I can talk about that constructive criticism I've received, but I can talk about what I've learned. I can talk about how I adjusted, and that really paints me as a very coachable person. And that is actually true. That is something I try to exude and I try to bring to an organization. And that's what this question is really designed to uncover, is how coachable is somebody? Do they listen to constructive feedback? Or are they going to tell a story about a time that they got constructive feedback and just complain about it or talk about how they didn't agree with it? That's not the best example for an interviewee to give in this particular question. So I love this question, and I think it's a great one to have in your arsenal. Describe your ideal manager. Describe your ideal manager. We'll let you know. I think this one's okay. It does have some value, but I think that the key here, and part of the reason I don't love it, is for a lot of interviewees, I think it's important to be flexible and adaptable with different management styles. And if you're an interviewee and you want to know how to tackle this question if you get asked, I think this is how you do it. And so if you're in an interview and the interviewer says, how would you describe your ideal manager? I think a good way to approach is by saying, well, I pride myself on being adaptable to different leadership styles. I don't think that I necessarily can work for just one style of manager. And I also think that different situations call for different leadership styles from management, from leaders. And it's my job to be adaptable in those situations. Certainly I really appreciate being trusted and being allowed to share my input. I like having ownership of my tasks. I don't love being micromanaged. But at the same time, I recognize that there are really sensitive situations or times when that leadership team needs to keep very tight control on something because maybe it's very important, maybe it's very sensitive, maybe it's something that's outside my comfort zone and they want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing before I get too far down the line. And if that's the case, then I'm going to adapt. I think it's a really great way, not just to answer the question and talk about the types of leaders that you like to work with, but to sell your adaptability and your flexibility. Next up, how did you prepare for this interview? I mentioned earlier, I've done over 40,000 interviews in my 20-year career in human resources and talent acquisition and all the career fairs I've been to. And I will say that this is always one of my starter questions. I've asked this question tens of thousands of times. And what I love about it is I get different answers. And I would, in some cases, especially on phone interviews, I could screen out probably somewhere between 30 and 50% of the candidates based off of their answer to this question, because I can get a good sense for how prepared they are, how much research they did. Do they really want this job? Or is this just another interview on the list? And in some cases, I've had candidates on phone interviews ask me what company it was that they were interviewing with again. They're on the phone interview with me. They have my email. They have my email signature with the organizational logo. And I said, tell me about how you prepared for this interview. And they ask, just remind me which company this is again. The interview's over. You're not even 30 seconds in. Because now I know that you're not prepared and that you're not thinking about this in an organized way. So this is also where research is very important, because you want to have good answers to this question, whether it is the research that you did online, whether you happen to speak with people who worked at the organization, maybe you're a referral of an employee or a former employee and you talk to them a little bit about their experience. Whatever it is, you want to show that you really did prepare beyond just applying for the job. Everybody's done that. So have an answer to this question. And I love this for the interviewer, and I love this for a well-prepared interviewee. Tell me about a project you are proud of. Tell me about a project you are proud of. I'm putting this up in Show Me the Money. Now, we're on a little bit of a hot streak here. A couple really strong questions. I know I hesitated a little bit, but the more I think about tell me about a project you're proud of, the more I love it. Because for the interviewee, it gives them a chance to brag a little bit. And it gives the interviewer the opportunity to hear about what does the interviewee take pride in? What is important to them? Instead of just asking them, what's important to you, when you ask this question, they demonstrate it and they're providing a real story. Now, for the interviewee, it would be great if you can talk about a project that demonstrates the skills that relate back to the job you're interviewing for. That's kind of the idea here. The other reason I really like this question is it is an equalizer for people of different experience levels. This is not just a question that somebody with 20 years of experience can answer. I spent a lot of my time in talent acquisition in early career and specifically interviewing students, high school students and college students, mostly college students. And if they didn't have a whole lot of professional work experience under their belt, this was a great way of asking them about their experience without it having to be job experience. Because in this case, the project could be a project they had in school, could be a classroom project, could be a project from an extracurricular activity. It could be a project from a volunteer opportunity. We've all worked on projects at some point in our lives when we get to the point where we're going on job interviews. So I love this question. I think it's a good early question. It does put the candidate at ease a little bit because they get to brag a little bit instead of just hammering them with, tell me about a time you got constructive feedback, tell me about a time you failed. It gives them a chance to also talk about something very positive and talk about something that they're happy about. Describe yourself in one word. Describe yourself in one word. Here's my one word, no. Nobody can be described in one word. And while it might be a fun activity as an icebreaker after somebody's hired, I think in an interview, it's not great. It's not great. I'm almost tempted to put it up in We Have Your Resume on File, because somebody who is prepared for this question can answer it very effectively. But the idea that we can package all of our experiences and our values and the things that are important to us into one single word, I don't care how many ridiculous words there are for us to use in the English language, that's really hard to do. And there's always going to be an explanation. There's always going to be a follow-up. It's not one that I absolutely love. If you're going to use it, if you're an interviewer and this is a question that you like, tell me in the comments about why you like this question. Debate me on this. I want to see a little back and forth. But if you have a probing question, a follow-up question after somebody describes themselves in that one word, I'd love to hear what that question is. And let's see if you can change my mind about this. Maybe I'll soften on this question a little bit over time. Why do you want to work here? Why do you want to work here? We'll let you know. I don't love it. I certainly don't hate it. I do think it has a lot of value because it does give it gives the interviewer a chance to learn a little bit about what's important to that candidate, to that interviewee. The only thing I don't love about it is it's easy to fudge. Somebody could say, I could ask a candidate, why do you want to work here? And they could very easily answer with what they think I want to hear or what they think I want them to say. So it's not a question that really captures 100% accuracy or honesty every single time. But as a way of trying to divulge a little bit about what somebody's motivated by, I think there is some value. For interviewees out there, if you get this question, this is, again, where research comes in. If you have done your research and you've done your due diligence and you know about the organization, you know about the job, and you're genuinely motivated to work there for a reason beyond just, I need a job, which, by the way, is actually an answer I've heard in response to this question. We know you need a job. That's why you're interviewing. But talk about what really has you there today. Why are you there today? This is an organization I think is really on the ascent, and I want to be a part of that. And I think I bring something to the table that will enable the organization to continue to move forward. I learned from employees who work here that there's a lot of opportunity for upward mobility for individuals who perform at a high level. I know that's me, and I want to be part of an organization that's going to reward my hard work and my success and give me the opportunity to take on more responsibility. Those were all great answers. What salary are you currently making? Now, this is a this is a loaded one. I left a lot of illegal questions off of this list. That's a different topic for a different day. Questions that are blatantly illegal, like what's your religion? The old Lou Grant, Mary Tyler Moore, for folks who remember that show. Those are illegal questions. You can't ask them. What salary are you currently making is illegal in some areas. There are places that now have made it illegal to ask for salary history. I've had the experience before where I got asked this question in an interview, and then as part of the screening process, they had me provide a copy of a W-2, of my most recent W-2. That should have been a red flag to me, by the way. Maybe they were just trying to verify that information because they didn't want to risk overpaying me, God forbid. Or maybe they were trying to see if I was being honest with them. Because if I said that I was making this much, but my W-2 said I was actually making this much, then they would screen me out for being dishonest. Now, I was honest. I was very forthright. But I still didn't love the fact that I had to provide that W-2. I didn't like it. And part of the reason that there are states and municipalities out there that are making this question illegal is because they believe that the determining factor shouldn't be what somebody made previously. It should be what the actual job should be paying based on the skills and the experience and the competencies. And I do agree with that thought process. Because somebody who's making a high current salary, that may not necessarily be because they're that much better at the job than somebody else. They may have just been a little bit more well-versed in how to negotiate pay or asking for raises. They may have been part of an organization that had a more aggressive strategy when it came to talent compensation. And it also oftentimes will fall along gender lines and racial lines, and it can create some adverse impact and some disproportionality. So I don't love this question. I think a much better way of asking the question is, what are your salary expectations? Or just to talk about what the job's range is and ask if that's acceptable. So this one goes in the trash bin. If there were a tier below collect your personal belongings, Gordon, I would put it there because in some cases it is illegal. And in places where it's not illegal, I don't think it's appropriate. And I think there's a better way to have this conversation. Tell me about a time you disagreed with your boss. Tell me about a time you disagreed with your boss. That's a bold strategy, Cotton. I like it because it is behavioral. I like it because it asks the candidate to talk a little bit about how they handle conflict resolution. And it also can provide some insight into how they handle managing up. And that's an underrated skill. I think the ability to manage up, the ability to disagree with a superior in a constructive manner, I think that's very powerful. But the variable here, and the reason I don't put it higher, is because part of the success of that and how they answer that question is based on the type of boss that is. Some managers, as we all know, are a lot better about this than others. I've been pretty fortunate to work for some managers who have welcomed respectful disagreement and dissension and discourse as a way of getting to a right answer. It sometimes will uncover things that maybe I'm not quite understanding or I'm not clear on, or maybe I have information that they haven't considered and it causes them to adjust. Anybody who reports to me, I want them to be able to push back on things from time to time with me, and as long as they're providing good reasons, So there's things I like about this question. I think there's a way to handle it. And I think for the interviewer, it's important that you're focusing on the right things, as long as you're focusing on the skills that it's uncovering, and not just, I want to find out if this person's going to be difficult, and I want to find out if this person's going to be high maintenance or what have you. Then you're using it as a screening question as opposed to a skill-based question, and then I like it a little bit less. What attracted you to this role? This is similar to why do you want to work here? I actually like this better than why do you want to work here. What attracted you to this role specifically? It's asking the candidate to call upon their research and talk about their values. I think this is a better way of framing the motivation question of why somebody decided that they were going to apply for that job and interview with that company. Again, beyond your hiring. I've heard that question. I've heard that answer, rather, where I've said what attracted you to this role, and somebody answered the fact that you all were hiring. It wasn't a great answer. It was honest. I appreciated the honesty, but it wasn't a great answer to the question. So for an interviewer, I do think that this is a valuable early question in the interview. And then for the interviewees, I think this is a great opportunity for you to talk about your research, talk about what you've learned, talk about what's important to you, your value system, your motivations, and how those two things align. Because at the end of the day, what the interviewee is trying to do is demonstrate that there is really good alignment, that there is a really good fit there between what the goals and the aspirations and the motivations of the candidate are, and what the values of the organization are, and what the organization wants to see a candidate become. Do you love to win, or do you hate to lose? There were 2 or 3 hiring managers at a prior organization who loved this question because the work environment was, we'll say, fun, competitive. And the most successful people within the organization tended to be those individuals who had a competitive spirit and competitive mindset. That said, this particular interview question can collect its personal belongings, Gordon, because I don't like it. First of all, there's no right answer. There probably is more of a wrong answer than a right answer. And it's so subjective. And it doesn't really provide any valuable insight that you couldn't get by asking a much better question. If you're an interviewee and you hear this question, again, I think it's important to be honest, but to frame it in a way that focuses back on a skill. So if somebody says, well, I love to win because the opportunity at winning is showing that I prepared and I executed and I did what I was supposed to do. And at the end of the day, that's my goal. That's what I want to accomplish. I love the feeling of being on top of something. I love, being able to be recognized for strong performance, things like that. Those are good answers to that question. Somebody who says I hate to lose, I don't love that answer. Because that somebody who hates to lose, that means that they're probably just motivated enough not to finish last. If you're in an 8-horse race and you hate to lose, then if you finish third, maybe you didn't win, but you didn't finish last. There's different ways that you can really tear that one apart. And the other thing is, for me personally, I don't hate to lose because when you lose, you learn. When I coach youth soccer and I tell these 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, I don't want you to get so wrapped up in the losses. So long as we can learn from them and keep moving forward, then those are good life lessons. And that applies to our professional lives too. I want somebody to be able to lose and not just hate it, but to embrace the learning opportunity. So there's too many problems with this question. I don't like it. I think it's gimmicky. What do you know about the company and the role? Goes right up and show me the money. Very similar to how did you prepare for this interview? This is a research question. What do you know about the company? What do you know about the role? Those two are very similar. I don't think you necessarily need to use both of them, but if you're an interviewer, I would highly recommend you use one of the two. And if you are a candidate, I would be prepared for either and both. And have that research ready to go and be able to demonstrate that you did prepare and you did your due diligence. And to answer that question in priority order of what's important to you. So what I learned about this organization is number one, this first thing I learned, and that was important to me because it aligns with this value or it aligns with this professional goal. And then so on and so forth. You generally can probably go over 2 or 3 of them and then end the question by asking the interviewer, is that sufficient or would you like me to go into some more detail? Which, by the way, is a great way to answer a lot of behavioral questions, is to answer succinctly and then instead of rambling on or spending too much time on one question, letting the interviewer know that you are prepared to provide more detail if they'd like. It also gives the interviewer a chance to move on to the next question if they feel you've done a sufficient job of answering it. Why are you leaving your current job? It's a bold strategy, Cotton. I think it's fine. I have no issue with it. If somebody is interviewing, but they're currently employed, I think it's appropriate to ask them why they want to make a change. For the same reason that you're asking them, why do you want to work at this company? Part of that could be, why do you not want to work at the other place anymore? And you do uncover some motivations and get to find out why somebody might be making a change. And you might discover it's something very simple. They're downsizing. And I think it's only a matter of time before, my department goes through that. And I haven't been there for very long. And I want to be in a stable place where I know I can grow and I know I can be at my best without having to worry about when the next round of layoffs are going to come through. That's a legitimate answer. It could be I hit a ceiling and I don't feel there's growth for me anymore there. I think there's a misconception about this question that when you ask somebody why they're leaving their current job or when you ask that question, that it always has to be something negative. I think this question does open a trap door to bashing the prior employer. And not just why are you leaving your current job, but its very close cousin, why did you leave your last job? We talked about that a little bit. It does open up the candidate to have an opportunity to start talking about everything they hated about it, everything that sucked about it, and the boss was a jerk, and they didn't pay me enough, and this and that and the other thing. And that's not how you want to answer that question. You do want to align it with what your research tells you this new company may value, and tie it back into not just why I left or why I'm leaving that job, but why I want to be here instead. You're creating a compare-contrast opportunity, and if you're an interviewee, again, great opportunity to sell why your values align with this organization, whereas maybe they no longer did with the prior organization. What are your strengths? What are your strengths? It's a bold strategy, Cotton. I was kind of between that and we'll let you know. And you know what? The next question is, what are your weaknesses? And I got to put those two together. I think they go hand in hand. I think if you're going to ask one, you should ask the other. I don't think that you should just ask one of them. And for anybody I've ever mentored before, especially at college, if I've mentored a student, one of the activities I have them do is a personal SWOT analysis, where I want them to really assess their strengths and their weaknesses. And in that mentoring relationship I have with them, we work on the weaknesses and we try to address opportunities to continue to improve them. And how do we accentuate the strengths, and how do we answer questions based on the strengths? Again, I do think there's value here. And for an interviewee to be able to answer it in a way that matches the role that you're interviewing for, and to focus on skills that are going to be relevant to that job, that's the key, right? Because if you're talking about something completely unrelated, let's say that you're interviewing for a job in accounting, and you're talking about how your greatest strengths are you're a really good soccer player. Okay, well, that's great, but is that going to help you as an accountant? Probably not. You want to make sure they're related. This, again, ties in with not only your self-awareness, which we've already talked about a little bit, having to be self-aware as a job seeker, but also your research for the organization. And in this case, that job description that you get when you apply for the job, one of the biggest mistakes people make is not to use that job description as a playbook. You should be digesting every line of a job description and not just skimming through it, and identifying what skills the company is showing are going to be particularly critical for that particular role. And if you can match up your strengths with the skills they need in that role, this is where you hammer that home. With the weaknesses, in this case, again, be honest, because this is where the interviewers hear the most BS answers. We want you to be honest, but talk about how you've overcome those weaknesses and, again, how you've worked at trying to learn from them and trying to address them. I've never met anybody who didn't have a weakness, but I still get folks who, I'll ask them, what's your greatest weakness? And somebody will try and say, well, I work too hard. Be thinking that they're cheating the question. Oh, I work too hard. I've been told that I have my work ethic is a weakness. I'm always driving forward, and they think that they're turning the question around. And a good interviewer will say, all right, well, so is your weakness that you work too hard because you struggle with time management or prioritization, where you can't get your work done in the requisite amount of time? Does this mean that I need to be concerned about burnout for you? Is this because you struggle with delegation? There's lots of ways to follow up to the, that answer to that question when somebody says, well, my greatest weakness is I work too hard. It's just, we know that trick. Most recruiters, most hiring managers have the superpower of knowing when somebody's trying to put one over on them. And this is one of those questions where we do have that happen. So if you're an interviewee and you get asked this question, be self-aware, be honest about a weakness, but don't just talk about a weakness that you have. Talk about a weakness that you know you've had and that you've worked to address, and how you've addressed it and how you've improved. Describe a challenge you overcame. This is right up there with something like tell me about a project you're proud of, or tell me about a time you failed. I actually like this better than tell me about a time you failed, even though they're very similar. Again, they're cousins. But this is a better way of asking that question. Tell me about a challenge you overcame. It doesn't necessarily have to be a failure, but it could be a situation where somebody was faced with a very daunting task, a very difficult a deadline or a timeline for a project. Maybe they were dealing with a teammate who wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and they had to overcome that. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. And as an interviewee, if you can, again, use self-awareness and think about this ahead of time and be prepared for what story you might share in case you get asked that question, I think this is a great opportunity for you. And I really do like this question because I think it gives the interviewee a chance to show not just their coachability, but their resilience, their adaptability, their level of preparation. And you get to find out whether they were successful or not. If they were successful, great. What do you think the skills were that were the most attributable to your success there? And if it ended up badly, if it ended up in failure, okay, great. What did you learn from it? What would you do differently? And have you had the opportunity to do differently since then? Lots of great follow-up questions. So I think that one is show me the money. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is going to be interesting. I've used this question a lot. And yeah, I'm going to put it here in, well, let you know. It's all right. It's an average question. It is a question about ambition. It's a question about, longevity. It's trying to find out what's important to and what's valuable to the candidate. Again, it's a very fudgeable question. There's lots of different ways that people can answer this question in a way that they think the interviewer wants it answered. And then this is also where interviewers have gotten some hilariously bad answers. Like I've gotten people who've said, "Well, I want to have your job," and I say, "Okay, what's my job?" And if they can't answer that question because they don't know what my job is, because why would they? That's not the job they're interviewing for. But if they don't know my job, so what you're telling me is that in the next 5 years, you want to hold a job that you don't understand today. So there is a way to turn that question, that answer back around. I think if you're going to answer this question as an interviewee, I think it's important to, again, focus on values and focus on some positive things, such as, in the next 5 years, I hope to have improved the skills that I'm going to bring to the table day one. I hope to have had the opportunity to develop new skills. I hope to be working on impactful projects. And since part of the reason I wanted to interview with this organization is because of its reputation for internal growth and mobility, I hope to have been given the opportunity to earn that next step, or maybe a couple next steps. But either way, I want to be a contributor. I want to be somebody who's seen as an integral member of the team. In 5 years, I want to know that I'm an individual that this organization can trust and continues to see growth and learning from, because I don't intend to stagnate. I will not be the same person 5 years from now. but I hope to be a better person who's continuing to contribute. It's a great way of answering that question, and it gives the interviewer a chance to dive in a little bit deeper. So, last but not least, why should we hire you? This is a closer. This is the Mariano Rivera of interview questions. Why should we hire you? I like it. I'm between show me the money and that's a bold strategy, and I'm going to put it in that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Why should we hire you? I do think is a really good closeout question. Again, it's vague and it's fudgeable, but it does give the interviewee sort of that last chance to sell themselves as the best candidate. And interviewees, that's your job in this case. If the interviewer says, why should we hire you? You want to be able to talk about why you believe you would be the best candidate for that job. And you have to answer that not knowing who the other candidates are or what they bring to the table. So you've got to focus in on something that that makes you unique and that you believe would separate you from somebody else. And I think the best way to prepare for this question is by asking yourself, if I were interviewing me, why would I want to hire me? What stands out? What can I bring to the table that maybe somebody else can too, but I'm confident talking about being a separator from the average individual? Is it your integrity? Is it your loyalty? Is it your work ethic? Is it your time management skill? Is it your desire to learn and continue to acquire new skills? Whatever it is, just make sure it's something that you're going to be able to back up. And you might even be asked for examples of when you've utilized that skill in a prior employer. So I think there's value here. Again, it's not one of my slam dunk, but we have like our top 5 here. But I think it's a question with a lot of value. So just to recap, we didn't have a lot that we were that were in. We have your resume on file. In most cases, the questions were either pretty good or absolutely awful. We're a little top heavy here. There are some questions that kind of transcend the rest, and usually they have to do with interview preparation and behavioral questions about situations where somebody's had to demonstrate success, failure, learning, opportunity to move forward. So as far as very popular, common interview questions that are applicable across the board, you'll notice that most of these questions could apply to a technical interview, a sales interview, a financial interview, a marketing interview, and everything in between. These are the ones I think are best. And for interviewees, I hope you have a chance to learn a little bit about how to answer some of these questions. And if there's a question that you like or that you've heard that you want to ask me my opinion on, put it in the comment section and I will respond and I'll tell you my thoughts on it. If you agree with this list, tell me why. If you don't agree, if you think that I am way off the mark with one or many of these questions, if you love when people sell you a pen and tell you if they love to win or hate to lose, go off on me in the comments. I want to hear all about it. And interviewee, if there's a question that you're stumped on that you've gotten in an interview and you want to know how to handle it, throw it in the comment section too, and I'll be sure to give you my 2 cents. As always, if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get more content like this. Please share, like, and comment, but keep coming back to Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this tier list video, and we'll see you next time. Good luck in your interviews.